Trust is a fragile thing, built over a lifetime but shattered in the span of a single heartbeat. When I stared at the bottom of my favorite porcelain mug and saw the undissolved white residue clinging to the ceramic, a cold dread settled deep into my chest. My hands shook, not from the chill in our kitchen, but from the sudden, terrifying realization that the man I had shared a bed with for 12 years was quietly trying to put me to sleep. My name is Taylor. I am 38 years old, and up until a few months ago, I believed I was living a quiet, blessed life. My husband, Julian, and I had built something beautiful from nothing. We owned a modest, sunlit home in a suburban neighborhood where the trees lined the streets like old guards. Julian was a graphic designer, patient, soft-spoken, and meticulous. I worked as a freelance accountant, balancing numbers from a small desk in our living room while our 10-year-old daughter, Maya, spent her afternoons drawing at the dining table. Our home always smelled of fresh coffee and the lavender detergent I used for the linens. It was a life wrapped in comfort, or so I allowed myself to believe. Julian was the kind of father who never missed a school play and the kind of husband who still held my hand when we walked to the local farmer's market on Sunday mornings. We had our routine, a gentle rhythm that kept us grounded. Every single evening, after Maya went to bed, Julian would brew a pot of chamomile tea. He would bring me a mug, exactly the way I liked it, with a single teaspoon of honey and a splash of oat milk. It was our quiet hour, a time to talk about the day or simply sit in comfortable silence while the clock on the mantelpiece ticked away. But over the last month, the rhythm began to warp. It started with small things. Julian began taking his phone with him everywhere, even to the bathroom, tilting the screen away from my line of sight whenever a notification chimed. When I asked him about a new project he was working on, his voice carried a strange, forced lightness that didn't match the tight line of his jaw. He started coming home later, smelling faintly of a heavy, unfamiliar cologne that wasn't his usual sandalwood. Whenever I looked at him, really looked at him, he seemed to be staring right through me, as if I were a ghost haunting his house. Then came the fatigue. For 2 weeks straight, every time I finished my evening tea, a heavy, unnatural drowsiness would wash over me within 20 minutes. It wasn't the peaceful tiredness of a long day. It was a thick, suffocating fog that dragged my eyelids down and made my limbs feel like lead. I would pass out on the couch, waking up hours later in total darkness, stiff and disoriented, with Julian already asleep beside me in bed. When I mentioned how exhausted I felt, he would just stroke my hair with a calm, practiced tenderness. "You're just working too hard, Taylor," he would whisper, his voice smooth and steady. "Drink your tea. It will help you rest." Last night, I decided to test a lingering, terrible suspicion. When Julian handed me the mug, I waited until he turned back to the kitchen counter to rinse a spoon. Swiftly, I poured the warm liquid into the soil of the large potted fern beside my chair, leaving just a tiny drop at the bottom. I placed the empty mug on the side table, leaned my head back against the cushion, and closed my eyes. I let my breathing slow down, mimicking the deep, heavy rise and fall of a person completely surrendered to sleep. I waited in the silence, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. A few minutes passed. Then, I heard the soft rustle of Julian's slippers on the hardwood floor. He walked over and stood directly over me. I could feel his gaze burning into my face. He reached down, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair away from my forehead. It was a gesture that used to bring me comfort, but now it made my skin crawl. "Taylor," he murmured softly. I didn't move. I didn't twitch an eye. Satisfied that I was unconscious, Julian let out a long, heavy sigh. He turned around and walked briskly toward his study. I opened my eyes just a crack, watching his retreating shadow. A moment later, I heard the click of his laptop opening, followed by the low, muffled sound of a voice coming through the speakers. He hadn't put on his headphones. Silently, I slipped off the couch. My bare feet made no sound on the rug as I crept down the hallway, pressing my back against the cold wall just outside his half-open door. Through the narrow gap in the door, the blue light of the laptop screen cut through the darkness of the study, illuminating the sharp angles of Julian's face. He wasn't working. He was on a video call, and the person on the other end was someone I recognized immediately. It was Elena, our real estate attorney and a woman I had considered a close family friend for years. Is she out? Elena's voice came through the speakers, hushed but urgent. Yeah, she's deep under, Julian replied, his tone devoid of the warmth he usually reserved for me. He sounded cold, clinical, and completely detached. The dosage works perfectly now. I have about 3 hours before she even stirs. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle a gasp, the cold wood of the wall supporting my trembling frame. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of what I was hearing. The dosage, he wasn't just giving me a sleeping aid, he was drugging me systematically night after night. Did you get the signature? Elena asked, leaning closer to her camera. Julian pulled a thick manila folder from his drawer and held it up to the screen. Right here. I guided her hand while she was groggy yesterday evening before she completely blacked out. She thinks she just signed the tax forms for our business account. She has no idea she just signed over her power of attorney and authorized the release of her inheritance funds. My heart stopped. My inheritance. My grandmother had passed away 6 months ago, leaving a substantial trust fund explicitly to me and Maya, meant to secure our daughter's college education and our family's future stability. Because it was an inheritance, it was solely in my name, unless I legally signed over control. Good, Elena said, a chillingly professional smile appearing on her face. The transfer to the offshore account will take 48 hours to clear. Once the funds are moved, we can finalize the liquidation of the house. By the time she realizes the money and the equity are gone, the divorce papers will already be served, and will be halfway across the country. She won't have the resources to fight us for custody of Maya. Julian nodded, running a hand through his hair. It's for the best, Elena. She's a good mother, but she's too rigid. She would never agree to sell the house or move. This way we start clean. She gets the furniture. We get the future. Hearing those words felt like a physical blow to my chest. It wasn't just a financial betrayal. It was a calculated assassination of my entire life. The man I loved, the man I built a home with, was plotting with our friend to strip me of my inheritance, my home, and my daughter, all while keeping me chemically submissive. I stood in the dark hallway for what felt like an eternity, the room spinning around me. Every instinct screamed at me to burst through the door, to scream, to tear the laptop from his hands. But a quiet, fierce voice inside me whispered a warning. Asterisk, if you confront him now, you lose. He has the paperwork. He has the lawyer. You are alone in the dark. Asterisk. For the sake of Maya, I had to be smart. I had to play the part he gave me. Slowly, carefully, I retreated down the hallway, stepping over the floorboards I knew would creak. I lay back down on the couch, pulling the throw blanket up to my chin, and forced myself to stay completely still. When Julian came out of the office an hour later to check on me, I kept my eyes closed, pretending to be the helpless, drugged wife he thought he had created. He turned off the lamp, whispered a hollow, "I'm sorry, Taylor," and walked upstairs to bed. The moment I heard the bedroom door close, I opened my eyes. The faux drowsiness was completely replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The clock on the mantelpiece read 2:15 a.m. I had exactly 48 hours before the transfer cleared, and I was not going to spend them crying. The next morning, I woke up early, intentionally rubbing my eyes and mimicking the usual grogginess. Julian was in the kitchen pouring orange juice for Maya. He smiled at me, the picture of a devoted husband. "Sleep well, honey?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "Like a log," I said, forcing a smile that felt like glass cracking on my face. "I don't know why I've been so tired lately." "You just need to take it easy," he said, kissing my cheek. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and patted his arm. As soon as Julian left for a client meeting, and Maya was safely dropped off at school, I went to work. I didn't call Elena, and I didn't call Julian. Instead, I drove directly to the main branch of my bank, bypassing our local branch entirely. I asked to speak with the senior fraud investigator, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Sarah. I laid the empty porcelain mug, which I had carefully sealed in a plastic bag, onto her desk, along with a copy of my grandmother's trust documentation. "My husband is drugging my evening tea," I told her, my voice remarkably steady, though my insides were shaking. "He and our real estate attorney are attempting to fraudulently transfer my inheritance and liquidate our marital assets using a forged or coerced power of attorney. I need to freeze every account associated with my name immediately." Sarah's eyes widened, her professional composure cracking for a split second before she nodded and began typing furiously on her keyboard. Within 20 minutes, a digital fortress was built around my grandmother's legacy. The pending transfer to the offshore account was flagged, frozen, and reversed. But safeguarding the money was only the first step. To save my daughter and my home, I needed undeniable proof of their crimes. I contacted a trusted private investigator, a former colleague from my corporate accounting days, who helped me quietly install a discreet, voice-activated recording device under the desk in Julian's study. I also secured a blood test at a private clinic that afternoon, documenting the high levels of prescription sedatives in my system. The paper trail was locking into place, but the final act of this betrayal had to play out in the light of day. The next evening was a Friday. Julian had arranged a small dinner gathering at our house, inviting a few close neighbors, my brother, and, calculatedly, Elena. He thought it would serve as the perfect alibi, a room full of witnesses who could attest to my chronic fatigue and declining mental state just days before he served the papers. The atmosphere in our dining room was warm, the scent of roasting garlic and rosemary filling the air. Maya was upstairs playing video games. Julian stood at the head of the table, pouring wine, while Elena sat to his right, laughing at his jokes with a casual ease that made my stomach turn. "Taylor, you look pale," Elena said, her eyes scanning my face with a thin veil of concern. "Are you sure you shouldn't be upstairs resting? Julian tells us you've been completely burnt out lately." "Actually, Elena, I feel incredibly awake," I said, placing my wine glass down with a deliberate, sharp click against the wood. The table fell silent. "In fact, my mind hasn't been this clear in months." Julian laughed nervously, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Honey, maybe you should sit down." "Take your hand off me, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, portable speaker, placing it right next to the flower centerpiece. I pressed play. Through the speaker, the quiet dining room was suddenly filled with Julian's own voice, clear and unmistakable. Asterisk. "The dosage works perfectly now." I guided her hand while she was groggy. "She has no idea she just signed over her power of attorney." Asterisk. Then came Elena's chilling response about the offshore accounts and stripping me of custody. The color drained from Julian's face instantly. Elena gasped, dropping her fork, which clattered loudly against her plate. Our neighbors froze, staring in absolute horror at the two of them. My brother stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. His fists clenched as he glared at Julian. "What is this, Julian?" I asked, looking directly into the eyes of the man I had loved for over a decade. "Did you really think you could drug me in my own home? Did you think you could steal our daughter's future and walk away clean?" Julian opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Elena, but she had already grabbed her purse, terrified of the legal implications unfolding in front of a room full of witnesses. Before she could reach the front door, however, the flashing blue and red lights of two police cruisers illuminated our living room windows. I had timed the confrontation perfectly with the arrival of the authorities, handing them the medical toxicology reports and the audio recordings on the spot. Julian and Elena were led out of our home in handcuffs, their dignity stripped away in full view of the neighborhood they tried to deceive. It has been a year since that shattering night. The divorce was finalized quickly, and thanks to the overwhelming evidence of criminal fraud and endangerment, I retained sole custody of Maya and full ownership of our home. Julian and Elena are currently serving their sentences, paying the price for a greed that blinded them to basic human decency. The transition wasn't easy. For a long time, the smell of chamomile tea made my chest tighten with anxiety, and I had to relearn how to trust my own surroundings. But human resilience is a remarkable thing. Today, Our home is filled with genuine laughter, not hidden secrets. Maya is thriving, her college fund is secure, and I have built a successful independent accounting practice from the very desk where I once doubted my own sanity. I survived the betrayal because I chose to fight with intelligence instead of rage. I learned that the people who try to put you to sleep are often the ones most terrified of what will happen when you finally wake up.